it simply hasn't reached that stage where I think that it doesn't really have that important of a presence in the Academy yet.
Is that because the fundament of it is basically looked at as primary or basic? Or I think really that's one of the opinions that I have about it. Most people do not classify it as a music that deserves studying, that requires that. But truthfully,
it's a week in your improv class, right? This is a blues week or whatever. This is the forms and things. It's a form to do something else over, you know.
Exactly.
Right, it's more of a folklore class. I mean, the kind of things that David teaches, you know, you're not teaching people how to play the blues. You're teaching them about the culture and the history and what it all means.
And there isn't as much of an art with a capital A aspiration within it. I mean, you know, one of the things when you talk about bebop with Dizzy Gillespie and all of those guys is that there was a turn away from the concept of music being there for entertainment and it being there as an art form. And that, it's really hard. I don't think anybody, maybe a couple people do that in the blues and they're regarded as kind of curious if they...
Well, if the history of the blues can be studied seriously and presented in publications and accurate historical markers as you're doing, I think that the historical performance of blues, that is, performing blues in historical styles, which many artists do, and it is still contemporary music. I believe any music performed today is contemporary music, but it can also be historical. That those performers ought to study the history of their music. They perform music of their location, their city, their geographical area, if they're in a blues location, or music of a particular style. You have serious jazz and some rock musicians who are what they call repertory bands. They recreate the music of Thelonious Monk or Count Basie and Duke Ellington and so on. Blues artists could do that, and they do it with a feeling. I mean, it doesn't have to be a quote academic exercise.
I think it will eventually get in the Academy more. But the other thing, though, without that happening, is that you notice something like David Limber, like Ben Payton in Mississippi, a guy that's started out as a soul artist, came back to Mississippi to become a acoustic artist, and he goes on the internet and looks up Son House songs and Tommy Johnson and Matty Delaney. I mean, really, people who were formerly really obscure are now just part of his repertoire alongside a Van Morrison song that someone requested that he learn at the bar. You know, so I mean, it's happening because of the proliferation of media. Then that now artists are increasingly playing at festivals, and so they hear somebody playing ragtime or older styles of music, and you know they hear it.
There's so much easier access too with the updated technology. I mean, everything is instant gratification. And almost, you know, that's kind of against the blues lifestyle. Well, in some ways. but in some ways. But as far as, you know, just we're hanging out, we're chilling, we don't have anywhere else to go, we're sitting on the porch, we're going to play a guitar, we're going to sing a little riff, we're going to do this. I mean, you have such an instant access to whatever you want, thousands of sounds, plugins, all these different things. So the nature of it is totally changing, I think, as regards to that.
Even listening to a CD, let alone an album, is something that's, you know, I asked my class, how many of you had, you know, a wall of CDs or something? And, you know, I mean, I thought I had this piece of furniture that held 800 CDs or something, you know. They're like, what? That's crazy, you know. And, you know, and we talked about this in a couple of classes, the physical, and this is getting to the audience, but the physical act of listening, you know, picking out something and listening to it rather than just having it, you know, just all available to you. It changes things a bit, but it also increases access, which is, you know, what we're seeing.
Indeed it does. And that kind of just reminds me of, you know, when we ended up going on the field trip here with the Blues Fellows. Well, we get to go down the road with them, take them through the Delta, and we're listening to, you know, Charlie Patton, or we're listening to Afro Sippy, and we get to have all these different sounds that you know, otherwise they could have just picked them up on the MP3, but these were new sounds for them, but they got to see them in a terrain that is, you know, we're watching the cotton gin go by, you know, we're watching all this stuff happen. You know, it's like time has been frozen, which that window of authenticity versus progress is still really interesting to me because, you know, talking to the students at Phillips College, I asked them when they saw some of the photographs and some of the works here, and I asked them just about their community when they see, you know, shacks and things like this, which, you know, we find really beautiful in some ways. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with them. On one hand, I love it. On the other hand, I'm ready to see it gone so we can get some, you know, real good building, sturdy, something that's not going to blow down. So it's kind of like, on one hand, there's that foot in and that pride and that tradition, and then the other hand is the desire for progress that just kind of keeps coming back. How do you guys feel that affects your work? Like, how does that reflect on what you research and the way you go about your business, especially with the trail markers, Scott?
Well, one of the things with the trail markers, I think, and I can think of a number of instances, such as Rosedale, which is Rosedale. In on Blues Market, we have something about Robert Johnson because there's this song "Crossroads." Went down to Rosedale, took my baby for a ride, took my rider by my side. Well, I say it's from Crossroads. Both of us are these guys are like, it's not in Crossroads but it was in Eric Clapton's version of Crossroads, where he took this line from Traveling Riverside Blues. He did his version of Crossroads, and in the last 30 years, part of the Robert Johnson myth has come to be associated with Rosedale because of the Cream's version of Crossroads, which was, you know, but anyway, so on the marker we will acknowledge some of these stereotypical things, and I think that we are playing off some of these stereotypes, and to a certain degree, that sort of folklore. You know, now we see everything about Clarksdale. According to legend, Robert Johnson sold his soul here, and it's like, no, according to people that pay attention, in the 90s, some guy put up a sign next to Abe's Barbecue, and then some journalist wrote, "This is where the Crossroads was," and every single journalist that came to town started saying this. And so if you go on the internet, 50 sites will say Robert Johnson sold his soul, you know, at Abe's Donuts, you know. So there's a certain sense to which a lot of this type of romanticized stuff is, we're trying to address it, I guess. I mean, there is a certain degree, like Clarksdale, at Ground Zero, they present music in the same way that Dixieland clubs in New Orleans present this sort of idealized view of it. So that is part of the tourist process of trying to cater to what you think are tourist expectations of what real music is. So in that sense, those stereotypes linger, at least commercially. I mean, we may try to counteract.
Right, but there are some juke joints, you know, African-American run juke joints that have been around for a long time that have actually tried to preserve that atmosphere the way it was. Jimmy Holmes' place in Bentonia is a prime example. It's been around for 50 years, and he said that he doesn't want it to change. And this was before tourists came. You know, he just knew it was something valuable to preserve some aspect of that, even though he's, you know, living in a nicer house now. And, you know, if you can keep maybe a place where you can do that and not have to live that way all the time, you know, I think that's progress in a way. And Red's place in Clarksdale, you know, it's still just a juke joint, you know, right, and now it's filled with people from Holland and Sweden some nights, but it's, you know, it's still like it always has been.
Well, you know, history also can become competitive. I think Mississippi has kind of taken the edge, but even within Mississippi, the state, various towns have tried to lay their claim to often a somewhat exaggerated piece of blues history that is connected to their town, to be a birthplace of this or that, or a crossroads of something, hold a festival, and so on. But blues, of course, has equally distinguished history in other parts of the country, too, which are doing far less than the state of Mississippi, or